300-pound dudes tackling you on a frozen field. The last thing you want to do is stay out there. Believe me, the Rams players were thinking about the jacuzzi at their team hotel, that they find it laughable, but more laughable if they totally disregard the trade whatsoever. This guy has transformed the balance of power in the Eastern Conference. And you could argue the entire defense is going to be absolutely ferocious next year. But if your number one priority is to win a Super Bowl, then J.J. Watt is making a grave mistake. To ride this Chad Henne experiment for an entire game, I might need a whole bottle of Hennessy just to get through that. Guy who's won 8 division titles, who's made 5 AFC championship appearances, who's reached the Super Bowl 3 times and has won 2 Super Bowls for this organization. Aaron Rodgers has only won 1 Super Bowl with Green Bay. Drew Brees has only won 1 Super Bowl with New Orleans. There's only 13 quarterbacks in NFL history that have won multiple Super Bowls, and Big Ben is one of those individuals.
Good morning and welcome to Morning Joe right here on J&J Media Network, Facebook Live, Twitter, and on YouTube. I'm Jonah Malkin with you every single Monday and Wednesday morning, 11 a.m. to 12 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, 10 to 11 Central, and 8 to 9 a.m. Pacific. Glad you could join me right here on a jam-packed Monday morning. Have some big news starting in the NFL with Deshaun Watson. I'm going to touch on the Indian Wells Tennis Tournament, even LeBron James passing Karl Malone for second on the NBA's all-time scoring list. That is coming up a little bit later. But I have to start in the NFL with the ending up the news that just kind of sent shockwaves through the NFL on Friday. Deshaun Watson is officially a Cleveland Brown. There were rumblings about this all the way back to last week, and Baker tried to get in front of this when he found out that the Browns had flown all the way to Houston to meet with Deshaun Watson to talk about it, and Baker gets in front of this, sends a big thank you note to the city of Cleveland on social media with the expectation that he's going to be traded. Now, obviously at the time, that didn't happen. Deshaun actually wanted out of the Browns situation, and for about 2 minutes, it seemed like the Browns were kind of faintly graveling back towards Baker when it seemed like they didn't have any more options. And then all of a sudden they pull a 360 and it becomes official. They end up actually announcing the trade. They acquire Deshaun Watson for 3 first-round draft picks in 2022, 2023, 2024, and then 2 other compensatory picks, a 4th-rounder in 2023, or a 3rd-rounder in 2023, and a 4th-rounder in 2024. And I think the Browns also received another pick as well, the 5th-round pick in the 2024 draft. So that's the compensation. That's the haul to make it official. And again, this is amid an ongoing lawsuit against Deshaun Watson, in which there are 22 ongoing civil lawsuits filed against him. Now, obviously, the big wrinkle in all this is that the Texas grand jury didn't indict him on any criminal charges. It doesn't exonerate him from anything, but clearly it provided enough cover for the Browns organization to say, hey, you know what? Let's go ahead and pull the trigger on this deal. So here's the interesting thing about a trade like this, because clearly what Jimmy and Dee Haslam, the owners of the Browns, Andrew Barry, the GM, Kevin Stefanski, the head coach of the Browns, what this is saying is that they fully believe that they have a championship team. They fully believe that when you look at this roster from top to bottom, it should be contending not only for the AFC, but for a Super Bowl. That's the message, is that, hey, look, we look at our roster from top to bottom. We have an elite backcourt, not backcourt. I'm in March Madness in basketball season. They have an elite backfield with Kareem Hunt and, of course, the all-pro running back Nick Chubb. They've got a tremendous offensive line. They've got enough weapons. They just signed Amari Cooper. They're trying to re-sign Jarvis Landry. They still have David Njoku. So you've got enough weapons. Defensively, your secondary is elite with Ward and Johnson. You've got Myles Garrett. You had Jadeveon Clowney. I'm not sure if they re-signed him already, but that I'm sure would be a priority for them. So they have all the components of a really good team, but what they feel like they were missing was an elite quarterback. And to be fair to the Cleveland Browns, as much credit as I do give Baker Mayfield for gutting it out last season and playing through the litany of injuries that he did, and anyone who tries to debunk that or say that Baker Mayfield was healthy playing last year, they're just ignorant and they've got a preconceived bias against Baker Mayfield. He was injured. He was playing with like a torn labrum in his shoulder. He had all these kind of issues going on. So I don't think last year was an accurate reflection of Baker Mayfield at his very best. But at the same time, I do think that if you have a Deshaun Watson with this roster, and again, this is assuming that he is cleared to play. The NFL still reserves the right to suspend him pursuant to their code of policy, their code of conduct policy. So no one is suggesting that he's going to be playing next year, but the reality is, if you take Deshaun Watson and the talent and the production that he had a full season ago and you insert him into that Cleveland Browns lineup last season, who knows what type of run they ultimately make. They for sure qualify for the postseason. They for sure reach the playoffs, at the bare minimum, the wild card game, if not anything higher. And I think that it does make them a contender in the AFC. Now, especially now more than ever, you look at the AFC and you look at how loaded it is from top to bottom. Obviously, the AFC West is a murderer's row with the Broncos retooling and revitalizing, signing Russell Wilson. Obviously, Randy Gregory just came as well. You've got all those weapons. They're going to be kind of reinvigorated to play a little bit more inspired, I think, this year. And that home field is going to be a major factor for them next season. Got the Chargers retooling. They obviously still have Justin Herbert, but you go out and sign Khalil Mack to pair him with Joey Bosa. They re-signed Mike Williams. So they're getting a little bit stronger. The Chiefs are still the Chiefs. Whether or not they've necessarily made substantial improvements, they reached the AFC Championship game again last season, so they're still elite. And again, now the Raiders, they traded for and they signed Chandler Jones and Devontae Adams. So they're going to be a whole lot better. Not to mention you've got Lamar Jackson and the Ravens in the AFC. The Ravens had the best record in the AFC before he got hurt, and then COVID struck everyone down, and they were kind of this beleaguered team just trying to float above water with Tyler Huntley, who I like, but he's not Lamar Jackson. Then you've got the Buffalo Bills still there. They just signed Von Miller. So you've got so many teams. It's so saturated in the AFC that it's just an arms race to see who can top the next team's biggest moves in the offseason. That's really what this comes down to. And so then I didn't even mention the Bengals, who won the AFC last year. Cincinnati with Joe Burrow. So this is the trend that the AFC is going into, is that if you don't have an elite quarterback, if you don't have an elite pass rusher, if you don't have elite wide receivers and weapons, you're not going to keep pace. And the Browns are looking at the landscape right now, and they're seeing, okay, Russell Wilson, Justin Herbert, Patrick Mahomes, Joe Burrow, Lamar, who's won an MVP, Josh Allen, who looks poised to win an MVP, a guy in Derek Carr who probably is a top 10 quarterback, maybe a fringe top 8, probably at 9 or 10, a really good quarterback in this conference. They're saying, we got to make a move. And to be honest, I think they have the personnel where this is going to make a substantial difference for them. Now, again, when you look at purely on the field, Deshaun has been sensational since he's entered the league. He's led the Houston Texans to the postseason. In fact, the last full season he played in 2020, 4,800 yards, passing, 33 touchdowns, just 7 picks. He's been a Pro Bowler 3 consecutive years since he tore his ACL his rookie season. So, again, I don't know whether he's going to be playing next year. Even if he isn't, he's only guaranteed $1 million against the cap for the Browns next season. That's all that they're required to pay him next season. But then after that, the full 230 kicks in. It's the most amount of money ever fully guaranteed to an NFL player. And again, clearly, based on the research that they and their team did, they felt that not getting indicted for those criminal charges provided enough cover and enough of an impetus to go out and do this trade. And clearly they were not concerned about any of the backlash that's going to be coming their way, all the criticism that's going to be directed in the organization's in their direction. And this is an organization, mind you, that doesn't really care about that because they have shown a penchant for signing guys with a checkered past before. We just saw Kareem Hunt. In 2019, he was cut by the Chiefs after a video was released of him shoving and kicking a woman at his own residence. And a couple months later, the Browns say, come play with us. We'll take you. We're trying to do everything we can. And that's the key thing is the Browns have tried, they've attempted to build up everything the right way. You stock draft picks, you build a team, you draft Nick Chubb, you draft the secondary with Denzel Ward, Myles Garrett, you got the defense locked up, you got the offensive line, you try to build in-house. You're lucky enough, you're fortunate enough to collect the number 1 overall pick. You take a quarterback with that pick in Baker Mayfield, and he ends up being good. He's a good quarterback, but he doesn't pan out quite the same way that you want. And at some point, you say to yourself, well, our patience is running thin. We don't want to pay him $130 million or whatever the contract would be. We got to go out and get a star. And they are doing everything they can to try and win right now. And to be honest, I give them credit for it. Again, this is setting aside all the off-the-field transgressions. No one is condoning anything that's been going on. If any of those lawsuits are found guilty, if he's guilty of any of those, it's appalling, it's abhorrent, and we'll revisit this and have another discussion. But for the time being, knowing everything that we know, all that we're seeing right now is Deshaun Watson is a Cleveland Brown, and that is a substantial upgrade for them. So that's that. So I want to transition to the Indian Wells tennis tournament. I'm a big tennis fan. People that know me and watch the show know how big of a tennis fan I am. Taylor Fritz, 24 years old, an American guy, just won Indian Wells. He beat Rafael Nadal in straight sets, won 6-3, 7-6. In fact, he snapped a 20-match win streak for Nadal. Nadal hadn't lost yet in 2022. He'd been on fire, playing the top of his game. He had just won the Australian Open. He was cruising through all these minor 1,000 tournaments, and this is the biggest minor tournament in tennis. The purse for the winner was over 1.2 million. So when I say minor, that's a loose term. This is a major tournament, and Taylor Fritz won it, and he became the first American, male or female, to win the Indian Wells tennis tournament since 2001 when Andre Agassi did it. And prior to this, he had only won one ATP tournament at all. In 2019, he won a 250 level tournament in Eastbourne. And this is substantial. This is substantial because when you think about, and let me preface what I'm about to say, I am not placing Taylor Fritz in this category just yet. Let me just preface this. But when you think about the greatest American tennis players, male, not female, male American tennis players of all time, obviously the first name that comes to mind is Pete Sampras, the 14 Grand Slams. You think about Andre Agassi and Jimmy Connors both having won 8 Grand Slams. You think about John McEnroe, who's won 7 Grand Slams. You think about Arthur Ashe, who's won 3. You think about Jim Courier, who's won 4 Grand Slams. Those are the greatest American male tennis players, in my opinion, to have ever played. You can go back all the way to the days of Don Budge, and there are guys who won 8 consecutive U.S. Opens in 1890 and 1910. Okay, I didn't see them play, and there were only 2 tournaments at the time, but those are really kind of the universal greatest American male tennis players of all time. And then you had this kind of newer tier of guys like Andy Roddick, who's the last American male to win a Grand Slam. He won the U.S. Open in 2003. And you kind of had James Blake and John Isner as this next tier of American male tennis players that were starting to ascend, especially Andy Roddick. He's kind of the bridge between those 2 classifications. And you look at American tennis now, and Taylor Fritz, I think, is the greatest American tennis player right now. He's the best American tennis player, male American tennis player right now. And I think that what this tournament shows is just the type of resurgence that tennis in the United States on the male side is showing. We're starting to see a comeback, a major comeback, and hopefully this can be a harbinger for what's to come with American male tennis players throughout this entire season. And you look at the number of guys that are ranked, and obviously Taylor Fritz is the first, and he's currently ranked now number 13, the highest ranking he's ever achieved. Riley Opelka is a fantastic player. You still have John Isner that's still working his way. Obviously, Jensen Brooksby played well. Francis Tiafoe has been playing well. Those kind of guys are the next generation of Americans male tennis players that are starting to burst onto the scene now, especially Fritz and Opelka. Isner has already been there for several years, but he's getting up there in age. Those guys are starting to turn a corner, and they're starting to challenge, and they're starting to consistently reach the 3rd, the 4th round of these Grand Slams at majors. And now some of these more minor tournaments, they're winning these types of events. And I've obviously been a tennis fan my whole life. I've been playing tennis for over 20 years. I'm actually a licensed tennis professional on the side of my broadcasting job. And for those people who don't know, I actually played against Taylor Fritz back in the 16 and unders. I played him in a tournament, and he won 6-0, 6-1. I did take a game off him, and I'm sure he's not watching this, but if he was to challenge me, I do have physical proof of the draw printed out in the actual score. Fritz and Malkin, 6-0, 6-1. My dad printed it out and highlighted it for me for my 24th birthday. So if we were to ever call a tennis match together, I do have proof of that. But needless to say, at the time that I played him, he was a number 1 rated player in California. And I remember he was livid when he conceded that one game. But what struck me then, playing him at that time, and mind you, this is now 9 years ago, and watching him play now, what struck me then and now is how dominant his backhand was, and is, especially now. And that's the part of his game that's allowed him to ascend. That's the part of his game that's allowed him to propel and to propel forward and to kind of elevate his game, is the power that he hits with his backhand, how dominant he can be with that backhand. Every single player on the ATP Tour has an incredible forehand, and he does as well. And every player on the ATP Tour, if they're given a weak return shot, or they're provided an opportunity to hit an approach shot, a weak approach shot with their forehand, they can come in. All of them can pound it, can place it, can hit the crap out of it. That's not saying much. That's kind of a prerequisite. But not all those guys on the tour can crush their backhands, and they've got winner's ability with their backhands. That's a unique skill set. That's a unique trait. And that's what he possesses. Now, as far as his overall game, he's always had a major serve. He's always had a big serve. He's 6'5", so that's always been a huge advantage for him. and he's always been very solid, but I think his net skills have improved a lot. He's a lot quicker. He reacts a lot faster when he's up at the net. His athleticism has improved. His conditioning has gotten a lot better. And we're starting to see him continue to evolve and continue to grow and mature and look a lot more refined. This is someone who started off, he didn't even go to college. He went straight to the pros out of high school. In fact, he's from San Diego and Torrey Pines. His high school and my high school competed against one another when we were playing in the state tournament one year as well. And this is someone who's lived and breathed tennis his entire life. Again, after his high school days, he started playing those junior tournaments. He was winning those junior tournaments at the majors, then started qualifying as a legitimate pro on the tour, worked his way up, cracked into the top 100, cracked into the top 50, was starting to make some noise, and it makes sense. His mom, Kathy May Fritz, is a former American women's tennis player. She was a great professional, reached the quarterfinals in 3 different Grand Slams, won 7 singles titles in her own right. So he's had that background. He's had that foundation in place even before he ever picked up a racket. And the one thing you know about tennis, if you are playing it seriously, and the guys that are playing on the pro tour can tell you this, you need to kind of have financial backing to get started, to pay for lessons. Tennis lessons aren't cheap. And fortunately for him, he grew up in an environment where they could support that passion. They could help foster that situation and allow him to flourish a little bit more. And he has just burst through and is just continuing to get better and better and better. And for me, when I got a chance to see him play, I went to the US Open in August, and I saw him play Alex de Minaur in the first round of the US Open. It was a 5-set thriller at Louis Armstrong Stadium. That was a surreal experience for me, because here you have a guy who I kind of look at not as a contemporary in terms of we went to battle all the time, but he's 24, I'm 25. To see him playing in that stage was surreal. Absolutely is incredible. So I'm rooting for him as an avid tennis consumer and as a fan of American tennis players. I'm rooting for him to continue to take that next step and crack into that upper echelon of American male tennis players that can do something special. And he's having an incredible run. And I think that this was a huge milestone for him, and I hope that he continues to succeed. So that was a very, very impressive win. Not to mention you're doing it against Rafael Nadal in that biggest stage. It probably doesn't get much better than that. So big congratulations to Taylor Fritz on winning his first Indian Wells tournament. And that's how I want to transition to the women's side. Iga Swiatek ended up beating Maria Sakkari to claim her first women's Indian Wells tournament title. Won 6-4, 6-1. Swiatek's just 20 years old. She's already won the French Open, won it in 2020. This was her 5th title on the women's tour, the WTA tour. It was her 3rd 1,000 level tournament title, and already the 2nd of 2022. She's the youngest player so far to win a handful of these tournaments since Caroline Wozniacki did it in 2009. Here's the interesting thing about the women's side. It's very different than the men's side. On the women's side, there's a lot more. There's some positives and negatives. The positives are that you have a lot of these precocious young women tennis players that are breaking through early, and they're showing signs of potential at such a young age. They're winning tournaments just even before the age of 20. We're seeing this all the time with Emma Raducanu. She's been fantastic. We saw Sophia Kenin win a tournament not too long ago. Coco Gauff is already ranked in the top 20, and she's like 17 or 18. We're seeing a lot of young women tennis players burst onto the scene. Even Naomi Osaka, when she first started, was winning tournaments and majors when she was 20. But on the other side, we haven't seen as much consistency on the women's side as far as consistent winners like we have on the men's side with the big three and Rafa, Roger, and Novak Djokovic. So because there hasn't been much consistency, again, outside of maybe the Ash Bardys or the Serena Williams, it allows for constant movement in the rankings when it comes to the women's side and different players getting their opportunity. Paula Badosa won Indian Wells last year. Now we have Iga Swiatek, who is now the highest ranked Polish woman ever, I believe. And here's the interesting stat. Since Swiatek won the French Open in October of 2020, there have been 4 different women's major champions in 5 events. Swiatek is one of 14 women to have won a Grand Slam event since the start of the 2016 season. By contrast, in that same time frame, Nadal, Federer, and Djokovic have won all but 4 of those major titles, tournament titles, in that same time frame. So, again, it just highlights the juxtaposition between the consistency on the men's side and the fluidity on the women's side. You have a lot more turnover. You have a lot more, I don't want to say competition. There's just as much competition on the men's side, but there isn't as much assuredness on the women's side. It's just a matter of fact. And I give her credit because what she's displayed out of those other kind of elite women that are also ranked in the top 10 and even the top 20 that keep fluctuating and they keep winning things every other kind of tournament, she's displayed a lot more consistency. She's always kind of in the thick of things. And again, the fact that she's only 20 years old, she was already a 3 seed in this tournament. And when I watch her play, she's just a very solid player. Nothing, and I mean this in a compliment, nothing she does necessarily blows you away, but she doesn't make mistakes. And that's what kind of hampers a lot of other players. Is a lot of them have so many strengths, a lot of them can flash and jump on the court. She's just super solid. She does not make mental errors. She does not make mental mistakes. And when you watch that women's final against Sakari, the biggest thing was Sakari just made a lot of unforced errors, especially in that second set. Now, that's not to take away anything from Swiatek. It's more to highlight that one of the reasons why she's been so good is because she is super, super solid. Now, she is exceptional at the net. Her net skills are fantastic. But as far as the ground strokes, she's got great ground strokes. I'm not going to make a claim that her ground strokes are better than Sabalenka's when she's on. Kvitovich's. There's so many, Kerber's. There's so many women. Victoria Azarenka. I mean, she's getting older. There's so many women that have incredible ground strokes, but a lot of them make mental errors eventually. And to Swiatek's credit, she's been one of the more consistent women on the tour. And again, outside of Ash Barty, Naomi Osaka for a stretch of 4 years, obviously right now she's dealing with some mental struggles, but you can cluster those two together. Serena Williams, those have been really consistent players. Swiatek, she's starting to creep into that group of women that are consistently reaching the quarterfinals, the semifinals. It's starting to make some noise on a more consistent basis. And I think from that perspective, it's fun to watch her. It's fun to watch her because she's consistent. You know what you're going to get from her. And she doesn't make mistakes. And I think that's really important. That's really important. That's what she displayed. And this was a major tournament. This was a major tournament for her to win. Indian Wells is a big time tournament. And it says a lot. It says a lot for her at age 20 to already be doing what she's doing, to be breaking through like that. Major congratulations to Iga Swiatek and her team, but primarily to Iga. So Let's see. K. Swiatek's ground strokes are on the level of ATP by stats, actually. So I'm not sure if I appreciate the comment. I'm not sure if the comment is meant to suggest she doesn't have good ground strokes or not. I'm assuming you like her, and I like her too. I think she's a fantastic player, and I think she's got great ground strokes. The only point I was making was I'm not sure if when I compare her ground strokes to necessarily some of the other elite women's tennis players that they're necessarily better. The difference is if you ask Swiatek to hit the same beautiful shot down the line without a miss, she's probably going to get more of those consistently in than someone else. And so again, appreciate the comment. I do think she's ascending, and she's only going to continue to get better. She's only going to continue to get better. So I was really impressed with her performance. Really impressed with her performance. Okay, final topic. My Malkin's moments. Have a lot of great Malkin's moments. So first, LeBron James passed Karl Malone, the mailman, for second on the NBA's all-time leading scoring list. It was incredible. It came against the Washington Wizards over the weekend. He had 38 points, 10 rebounds, 6 assists in the loss to the Washington Wizards on the road. He's got right now 36,947 points. The only guy that he trails right now is former Lakers great Kareem Abdul-Jabbar on the NBA's all-time scoring list. He's got 38,387. So there's about a 1,400 point swing if I do my mental math quickly. So here's the impressive thing about LeBron, and he obviously came out, he's talked about this on the barbershop, he's talked about this on various other platforms, how he always feels like he is snubbed when it comes to the best scorers of all time in NBA history. And I think part of it is just we pay him a bigger compliment as being a much more well-rounded player who is exceptional at 3 phases or 4 phases, multiple phases of a basketball game, as opposed to when you look at guys like Michael Jordan or Kobe or Durant, some of these guys who that seem to be the main thing they specialized in. Now, both of those guys could defend as well, but when you think about LeBron, the first thing you don't think about necessarily is the scoring. You think he is an elite scorer who is a one-of-a-kind generational passer and all-around player. And in the eyes of many, he's the greatest of all time, or the second greatest of all time, top 3. So regardless of how you feel about LeBron, I do think it's impressive that he continues to reach these milestones. Again, even given the fact that we don't view him in that certain light or place him in that category. And it's impressive, the fact that he just keeps climbing. It's a testament to his endurance, his reliability, his consistency, his availability. And it's a credit to his longevity that he's been able to exhibit for years and years and years. This is 19th season, and at this pace, I wouldn't be surprised if he could surpass that mark, if not next year, maybe in 2 years if he's still playing at that time. So major shout out to LeBron for that. Major shout out to Iga Swiatek. I just talked about her. She beat Maria Sakkari to claim her first women's Indian Wells title. Here's the interesting thing. So on Monday, she's moving to a new career high ranking number 2 in the world. And she matches Agnieszka Radwanska's record as the highest ranked Polish tennis player ever in the history of the sport, in the history of Poland. It was her 5th, as I mentioned, title on the tour, 3rd at the 1,000 level, 2nd in the year 2020. And she's the youngest player to win those, to win a bunch of those types of trophies since Caroline Wozniacki did it in 2009, as I mentioned. Transitioning to basketball, especially college basketball, we're seeing all these kinds of upsets happening. And speaking of upsets, in the women's basketball tournament, the 10th seed South Dakota advanced to their first ever NCAA Sweet 16, knocking off the 2 seed Baylor yesterday, 61-47. This seems to be the year that we're seeing, especially on the women's side, the tournament just being so unpredictable. We saw Iowa go down. We've seen a lot of teams get upset, and it's great for programs like South Dakota on the women's side. It's great for the sport. That's what March Madness is all about. And I was happy to see that program do that. And speaking of upsets on the men's draw, the 15th seed St. Peter's Peacocks, they became the third ever 15 seed to advance to the Sweet 16. They stunned Murray State, the 7th seed, 70-60 in the round of 32. They had upset Kentucky, the number 2 seed, in overtime in the first round to even get to that position. And they joined elite company with Florida Gulf Coast in 2013 that achieved that feat. They obviously upset the 2 seed Georgetown at the time. Then they ultimately beat San Diego State in the second round. Then you look just last year in the tournament, Oral Roberts in 2021. They upset Ohio State, the number 2 seed at the time. Then they beat Florida in the following round, and that allowed them to reach the Sweet 16. So St. Peter's and the Peacocks, they got a tough matchup against Purdue coming up, but should be a great Sweet 16 next Thursday is when it begins. That's all the time that I got for today. I'm ending a couple minutes early today. Thank you so much for joining me right here on Morning Joe every single Monday and Wednesday morning, 11 a.m. to 12 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, 10 to 11 Central, and 8 to 9 a.m. Pacific. Make sure to subscribe to my YouTube page, Morning Joe with Jonah Malkin, on YouTube. Follow me on Twitter, Jonah Malkin, or at morning_Joe_JMalk97 on Instagram, and Jonah Malkin on TikTok. That'll do it for us. Thank you so much, and have a lovely rest of your morning.